Welcome once again, fight fans, to DAZN MMA. Sean O'Connell, Dan Hardy, and the eventful week, at least for us that are associated with the PFL. Dan Hardy, let's start with the big breaking news. After months and months of speculation and negotiation, it is official. Professional Fighters League has acquired Bellator. Your reaction?
Very, very exciting. You know, a stacked roster, some world-class talent, world-ranked, world-class talent, world champions. I mean, you know, I've been a fan of Bellator for a long time. I think they do a lot of good things, and I think they've managed to acquire and develop talent that has never made it onto other stages in the world, but is still legitimate world-class contenders. And then, you know, to integrate that into the PFL in some capacity, or even just kind of run them side by side and pitch them against one another. It just creates so many interesting matchups and opportunities for us that I think both PFL and Bellator will benefit from this.
That's the plan initially. All the early reports, and they are all early reports because this is just breaking news, it's brand new, but Bellator will be a vertical, a standalone, a reimagined Bellator International Champions Series. Will be 8 events staged all over the world. We've been told in the world's great cities. So I'm really hoping that I get to be part of that broadcast crew, maybe see some new places. But yeah, and then the mega event that we are promised, who knows when it's going to happen? Bellator champions versus PFL champions. This is what we have yearned for as MMA fans for a long time. If there's going to be multiple promotions, and of course there always will be, what does it look like when the best from one faces off against the best from another? Now that this is all under one roof, there's nothing stopping Bellator champs and PFL champs from fighting one another. Sounds like that's going to be a focus of at least one event per year. I wish we could do the MMA World Cup and it'd be everybody, but this is an unbelievable start to really, finding out who the best in the world is.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I think it would not only does it create another very interesting avenue for a lot of these fighters to decide whether they want to go Bellator and win that belt, or PFL and win that belt, and then potentially grab them both. I mean, as a fighter, to have more goals, more things that you can achieve, that's hugely exciting. And then to know that, you know, even once you've won the championship, you know, you become the Bellator champion or the PFL champion, it doesn't mean that you're at the end of the line there and you have to kind of go back and do it again. Or, you know, moving on to the like say we move on to the pay-per-view bracket, and then you've got champions versus champions, and you've got, you know, legitimate fighters from one organization coming over and challenging others. It's going to validate everybody as world-class fighters. And I think that there's going to be a lot of debate as well around the matchups, you know, what people think about this champion and how they match up with this. And these are conversations that can go on throughout the season for PFL. If this guy gets to the championship, what's he going to look like against Bellator's champion if such and such is still holding the belt? They're the kind of conversations I love to have. And on a podcast like this, Sean, you know, and you and I are going to be having those conversations a lot now.
The beauty of it, there's a lot of detail that needs to be worked out here, right? And obviously, everyone involved in the PFL and everyone involved in Bellator who sticks around through this merger, through this acquisition, is going to have to do it right, okay? Because there's a bunch of great fighters who can't be underutilized. There's a bunch of really high-quality fighters who now have a whole new possibility, a bunch of different matchups in front of them, when maybe, you know, like a Chris Cyborg or a Kayla Harrison, there wasn't a lot of compelling matchups left for them in the PFL alone or in Bellator alone. And now this creates a dream matchup for fans. And I'm positive we're going to get Chris Cyborg versus Kayla Harrison at some point. The possibilities here are why this is important for the average MMA fan. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool, I only care about the UFC, or I only care about one championship, that's fine. But you need to acknowledge that there are endless possibilities now for the Bellator and PFL fighters. And if we get creative enough, if Dan Hardy makes the right suggestions when the bosses ask him who should be fighting who, then every fan benefits from this. So it's a big day for mixed martial arts when you have two major companies merging together, PFL buying Bellator, and Don Davis said it in an interview. Every Bellator fighter is now a PFL fighter, which means you could see some incredible matchups that we hadn't even dreamt of a month ago.
Yeah, and you know that's for me as a martial artist, you know, and you know as fighters, that's what we want to see, right? We want to see the best fighting the best. What we don't want to see is someone picked off further down the rankings that, well, he's the next person in line and whatever. Like the super fights, that's the era that we're in right now. Even with, you know, the things that happen in boxing, that, you know, the likes of Ngannou, Fury, and, you know, Jake Paul taking on Nate Diaz. Like these are all super fights and things that a lot of fighters, Bellator fighters included, they didn't have these options, right? And something that Don has expressed quite clearly is that, you know, we're open to collaborate, right? So you mentioned one championship. They've got some great champions. It will be amazing to collaborate with them. Same with Rising, of course. They've done really good collaborations with Bellator already. I would love to see those continue. But if everybody in the field is collaborating, aside from one organization, I think it puts pressure on that organization through the fans and through their fighters to kind of open the doors and open the possibilities to work together. Because, I mean, as fight fans, we want to see these fights. And as promoters, they want to make that money. It's only a matter of time before, you know, people's opinions soften. You know, once upon a time, women were never going to fight in the octagon, and that obviously changed pretty quickly. Like things do change and things will change. And I think pressure from the fans and from the fighters as well, who do want to achieve more. Anderson Silva wanted to box. If you're a PFL fighter, you can box. If you're a Bellator fighter, you're a PFL fighter, which means you can box. Opportunities have opened up across the board. And I think that it gives everybody a lot more flexibility and will give them a lot more excitement as well for what there is in their future.
Even if this news hadn't broken this week, a huge week for the Professional Fighters League, because coming up on Black Friday in Washington, D.C., the 2023 PFL World Championship, 6 $1 million title fights are set to take place, plus the return of Kayla Harrison, plus the return of Ray Cooper III, plus the debut of Derek Brunson, a massive, massive card to cap off the PFL year. And then, of course, you and I have the PFL Europe Finals in December. But let's focus on Black Friday in Washington, D.C. I want to start it with the main event. The main event on this one, lightweight championship, the Canadian gangster, Olivier Aubin-Mercier and Clay Collard. You've got one of the most technical, tactical, smothering lightweights that we've seen, undefeated inside the smart cage, versus a guy who's, for my money, the most entertaining lightweight on planet Earth. Win or lose, Clay Collard gives us a show.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. It makes sense why it's the main event. You know, you look at both of these guys, and I think honestly they represent different ends of the martial arts spectrum. On one end, you've got the highly cerebral, high fight IQ, very technical, very well conditioned, and very well measured in Olivier Aubin-Mercier. And then on the other side, sometimes looking a little bit reckless, always very game, happy to wade into range and take a shot to land a shot, as we saw in the Shane Burgos fight and Clay Collard. You've got someone that is going to push a pace, he's going to take risks, but I also think it's going to bring the other qualities out in both of these fighters. I think we're going to see Clay Collard making more smart decisions in this one because he knows what he's up against. And I think those smart decisions are going to be able to make this fight, how's best to put it? I think the smarter decisions from Clay Collard will allow him to drag this fight into the deeper waters, where then we'll see the other qualities of Aubin-Mercier, which I know full well that he has, but he doesn't really need to lean on them that much because he is so technical. But I think in this fight, he is going to be pushed. He is going to be hitting the midsection, and he is probably going to gas and slow down a little bit because that's what Clay Collard does. You know, the longer this fight goes, the more it becomes a battle of attrition, and that's where it leans into Clay Collard's favor. But if he doesn't make smart decisions in the first couple of rounds, he won't get to those stages of the fight where he thrives. So I think we're going to see the best of both of these guys, but I also think we're going to see their perhaps more underestimated skill sets on show in this fight as well because of the stylistic matchup.
On paper, it's a little bit of a striker versus grappler, but both of these guys are very well-rounded. And we've seen OAM use his strikes, including in last year's championship, use his hands to get a finish. This year, it was kicks that got him a finish. Clay Collard, very underrated as a grappler. I think we're going to see a little bit of everything in this fight. And it's two high-level mixed martial artists squaring off for $1 million. Another little tidbit that's interesting for me is Clay Collard shows no signs of slowing. As young children, is like, you know, he's up 30 years old. He's pedal to the metal all the way. Fighting is what he does. fighting is his plan A, B, C, D, and E, right? OAM has expressed that, man, this is a grind. He's in his third or fourth season now. And he's like, I'm not doing this thing again. So does that play a factor in this fight? We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could. It's a very, very good point to make. But I also think that, having stated that mindset, that kind of opens it up for Clay Collard to into those moments where he might ask himself, how much more do I want to do this? How much do I want to push? There's something to be achieved here for Clay Collard, whereas Aubin-Mercier is walking the same path that he's walked before, only this time he's got somebody in front of him that wages war against every day as soon as he opens his eyes. And that's one of the reasons why Clay Collard is so exciting. He will push Olivier Aubin-Mercier, and that's where we'll see where his fight IQ tops out.
Heavyweight matchup, Denis Goltsov, Renan Ferreira, enormous human beings. Goltsov with certainly the more well-rounded skill set, a deep well of experience in not only mixed martial arts, but in combat sambo as well. And Ferreira is obviously much more of a raw prospect, but as elite of an athlete as you're going to find in the sport, especially for someone that size. And we've seen it this year. He relocated his training camp. He's at American Top Team. His grappling and his takedown defense are not the liabilities that they once were for him. This is a crazy fight.
Yeah, it is absolutely. And I think, you make a good point. He is very much a raw prospect, Renan Ferreira, which is the kind of prospect that you want to walk into the gym if you run American Top Team, right? Like, you want someone to walk into the gym who's, 6'8", massive reach, massive leg length, quite confident to close people down with long-range kicks and punches because he knows how effective he can be. He's got proof and evidence in his career. And you can imagine how quickly he's evolving on the mats at American Top Team when they've got a prospect like this that's in the running for $1 million, knows he's got somebody in front of him that's got a lot of experience. But what I will say about Goltsov's experience, yes, it is an advantage, but I also feel like his progress in his career as a martial artist is probably not quite as expedited, you could say, as Renan Ferreira. With him being such a raw prospect, I feel like his growth is going to be far more significant in the weeks that we've had between the last couple of fights. Like, Goltsov is a vicious striker, great jab, really, really clean, crisp, lovely footwork, sets his cross up nicely as we saw against De Castro. But then what are we going to see from Ferreira that we can't prepare for? I mean, the kick that he throws through range, it covers so much distance. And then, as we saw against Sheffield, with him managing the range so well and utilizing his arm reach, we might see new techniques that Goltsov couldn't have prepared for. Whereas for Goltsov, I feel like, although he will make good improvements, they'll be a lot smaller by comparison. So maybe not quite as surprising for Ferreira.
Yeah, Goltsov much more of a known commodity. Ferreira, bit of a wild card, heavyweight championship, $1 million on the line. I love the Larissa Pacheco-Marina Moknatkina matchup because we know how hungry Moknatkina is, but also Larissa Pacheco is out to prove that all this conversation about Cyborg and Kayla Harrison, who's making her return on this card, all the conversation about Amanda Nunes is missing a major mark, and that Larissa Pacheco herself, looking to become the first two-division champion in PFL history, is the best female fighter on the planet. She gets this win. She does it in an impressive fashion. I don't know who's going to argue.
I don't know how you can argue. I mean, the first fighter to win a belt in 2 weight classes would be incredibly impressive. But it's not like she's fought really, really hard to win those fights. I mean, she's blasting through people. Like, she is a wrecking ball of an individual. So if you're Marina Moknatkina, you know what to expect. You're going to have a hard fight, right? It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how prepared you are. If you're fighting Larissa Pacheco, you're going to have a rough night, right? So in Moknatkina's mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, I've got to prepare for that. I've got to prepare to lose rounds and to lose moments in the fight and to dig deep. And I do want to use my grappling as an advantage here, but I might not win every grappling exchange because Pacheco is a good grappler as well as a good striker. So you've got to kind of play the long game a little bit as well. And she's got to keep it in her wheelhouse as much as she can. Like, if Moknatkina can use her clinch and her throws and even maintain top position for short periods of the fight where Pacheco's having to defend arm bars or scramble back to her feet, that is all money in the bank for later in the rounds. And I think Motnatkina needs to be in the mindset that she's going to have to go to war if she wants to win this fight. And I think Pacheco is, I mean, she's a handful in every range, isn't she? I think the disadvantage here for Pacheco is if she comes in expecting to blast Motnatkina out of the water and then doesn't do it in the first round. That's when things might start shifting in the opposite direction.
Welterweight championship. I love this one because both of these guys have been part of the PFL since the first season of the PFL. Now, Sada Bousi was a middleweight at that time, and he since has made the transition down to 170 pounds, won the world title at 170 pounds last year. Magomed Karamov was the first welterweight champion in the PFL season. He beat Ray Cooper III by guillotine in season 1, and here both of these guys are still sticking around. They've also fought before, and it was a little bit of one-way traffic in favor of Maga because he was the better grappler. Well, we've seen all the improvements that Sadabu has made. This, to me, is not only a testament to what Sadabu has done work-wise, but just kind of the narrative of you're not the same fighter that you were 3 or 4 years ago if you're doing things the right way. He clearly has not. Not only has he won a championship, Maga showed up ready to win championships in this organization, right? Ready to contend for championships. He's a multiple-time finalist. Sadabu took the long road, but here he is. And now we get to find out this, not final product, but this most recent product for both of them. What's better? What version is better? The Maga, who was already great when he showed up, or the Sadabu, who needed to plug in some holes and has certainly done so. This is a lovely matchup for those of us who've been following the sport, following the organization, and following these two fighters from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a fascinating one. You know, we know from when Magomed Karamov won the title that he was a very, very dangerous, well-rounded mixed martial artist. And, you know, he proved that against Sada Bousi. But then the growth that we've seen in the recent years of Sada Bousi and the confidence that he's got from that, this now feels like a very, very different fight. This feels like we've got Magomed Karamov, who we know is very good, and Sada Bousi, who we've realized is very good. And how does that look now? I think it looks very different to the last time. Doesn't mean it's not going to be very, a very tough test for Sada Bousi because he still has to deal with someone who's an expert in striking and grappling. Whereas for Sada Bousi, he's definitely an expert in striking. And I still feel like his grappling is underestimated, but it's certainly not going to be on the level that he would need to be able to dominate Magomed Karamov on the floor. But I do feel like, you know, the confidence that he's got from his takedown offense, even realizing that against Carlos Leal in his last fight, he's going to open up more opportunities for him to strike. And, you know, because Magomed Karamov is confident in his striking as well, he might linger in that range for long enough to catch a foot at the side of his head, and that's a game changer.
Light heavyweight matchup, Impa Kasanganay, Josh Silveira, both of these guys products of the PFL Challenger Series, both of them very fast, a little bit undersized for the weight class, if we're being frank, but two technicians. Impa Kasanganay is the sleeper in a lot of people's minds because he's so athletic and he just approaches this game in such a calm and cerebral manner. But then when it's time to actually fight, he unleashes this crazy explosiveness and savagery. I love this fight. It's also two great South Florida gyms, as we've talked about before, Kill Cliff and American Top Team representatives squaring off against one another. And it's my favorite weight class. What do you think of this one?
Yeah, fascinating. And I like the fact that they're both a little undersized as well. You know, what we've seen in this weight class before are the bigger fighters dominating, you know, the 6'4", 6'5" guys with the long reach. What we're seeing now is two guys that have got very, very deep skill sets, particularly, you know, with Josh Silveira being, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, having his wrestling pedigree as well. And of course, working striking for many, many years with his legendary father and coach. And then on the other side, Impa Kasanganay, who is an incredible athlete that moves very, very quick for this weight class. For me, the strength for Impa Kasanganay is his hand speed on the inside. He kind of occupies the space right between the skill sets of Josh Silveira. Silveira on the outside kicking, very, very dangerous. In the clinch and on the ground, very, very dangerous. But that middle range where Kasanganay can keep his hands up and have a little bit of that Mike Tyson speed and footwork on the inside, that is problems for everybody. And I think, you know, both of these guys are going to look at one another and see lots of ways that they could potentially lose the fight. And I think that brings the best out of both of them. And you know, I think it will be a battle of ranges. I think it's going to be the one that can maintain the fight in the range that suits them the best, which obviously, you know, you lean towards Josh Silveira slightly because he's got more options in that range. But then the equalizer is the speed and power of Kasanganay. And what we saw him do to Martin Hamlet, who is a big, strong, powerful light heavyweight, he can do that to anybody in any weight class. And Silveira has to be very, very cautious if he gets trapped up against the fence.
The first title fight of the night will be for a featherweight championship and $1 million between two individuals who were lesser knowns, virtual unknowns starting the season. Jesus Pinedo looking to become the first Peruvian mixed martial arts champion in any organization, and Gabriel Braga, who's continuing the legacy of a fighting family, still undefeated as a pro mixed martial artist. And by the way, they squared off earlier in the regular season. An incredible fight back and forth. We didn't really fully appreciate what we were watching then because we didn't know enough about these guys to know that this is a championship preview. These are two people capable of beating anybody at 145 pounds, and now they square off again.
Yeah, great points. Honestly, this is my favorite fight on the card. You know, for as spoiled as we are with the championship bouts, I'm most intrigued by this one because they've kind of come into the division and they've swept all of the former champions and contenders to one side. They've presented themselves as the top two fighters in this division within the space of a few months, which is really the benefit in the PFL's format. You know, it's very unusual that a fighter like Pinedo would get the opportunity to fight Loughnane, who was last year's champion. In the fight that he did, he would normally have to earn his way to that position. But because of the PFL format, he found himself with that opportunity and he made the most of it. And then you look at Braga, he's done the same thing. He's dispatched high-level fighters that we're all very familiar with. And the beauty is, as you said, we've got a split decision 3-rounder from them previously when we didn't really know too much about them. Now we know a lot about them and we can go back and watch that fight and think to ourselves, well, if you add 10 minutes to this, 2 more rounds, this makes it even more interesting. Like, this fight could swing back and forth over and over again. And I think these two guys are going to be the top contenders next year as well. Unless we bring some fresh blood into the division, I think these guys might have upset the apple cart permanently.
Well, there was a Bellator acquisition that could add some top flight talent to that featherweight division. Also, you have a grudge match between Chris Wade and Bubba Badman Jenkins. You have the return of Kayla Harrison now taking on Aspen Ladd, and Ray Cooper III, 3-time finalist, 2-time welterweight champion, who says, I'm never fighting at welterweight again. He gets a middleweight matchup with Derek Brunson, who's making his PFL debut. This is a massive card on Black Friday. Take a pause in your shopping. All right, get ready for some ESPN pay-per-view. Dan Hardy's going to be there. I'm going to be there. Randy, Kenny, the whole show. This is what it's all about. 6 $1 million championships on ESPN. And, of course, also on DAZN.